Chinese local banks are freezing deposits. Protesters cannot go near the bank as their health app for COVID turns red. Authorities provided no explanation. We go into details on this. Plus, the recent escalation in tones regarding Taiwan, China's aggression near the island. What can the US do? More importantly, what must the US do domestically to strengthen its foreign policy abroad? I speak with Kelly Sloan on this at the Western Conservative Summit. Welcome to China Insider. I'm David Zhang. Local banks in one province froze tens of billions of yuan worth of deposits, estimated to be about $6 billion US. Now the local authorities may be using the health app for COVID to stop protesters demanding an answer. Some out-of-city people reported that their health app turned red when they scanned other QR codes to get into the city where these banks are located. And officials use COVID as the reason to limit out-of-city bank account holders from accessing their funds or to protest in front of the banks. Everyone is mandated in China to have a QR code that tracks their exposure to COVID, and these funds have been frozen since April. One depositor from out of town uses one of the banks, and after arriving at the city, his health code turned red and the man was escorted away by 6 police officers. He couldn't withdraw any money. One of the banks claimed that Sun Zhongfu, a shareholder of one of the banks, fled following serious financial crimes in March and potentially leaving with millions of dollars. But it still doesn't explain why at least 3 other banks cannot provide funds to the depositors, while not allowing anyone to even go near these banks. If this is true, well, China has successfully used its version of the COVID passport to control the lives of its citizens everywhere, including restricting them from accessing their own money. But what exactly is the reason they're doing this? In other words, is it the application of a public health system in more totalitarian ways the only answer to preventing people from getting their money? Well, here's why I think this is happening. The Chinese economy. All signs are pointing to it being in the worst state ever since Chinese leader Xi Jinping announced publicly a long time ago that there's a rising east and falling west. And this slogan claims that China's rise over the US is coming, or it's imminent. But in the months of May this year, China's economic data shows contraction with little signs of change. Still, the leading contributing factor we know is because of the zero COVID political restriction. Namely, in the 2 months and April and May and counting, the lockdown method used in Shanghai and various other cities across China, and this has caused many inside the Communist Party even and surrounding fields like college think tanks and public figures to sort of demand and denounce the extreme measures to end. And the Chinese government, however, will not back down as this came directly from Xi Jinping himself, this zero COVID model. And they will do anything, including freezing assets from citizens to sort of collect the money and keep it tight. So far, these 3 or 4 local banks in Henan province are facing protests and citizen outrage, of course, over their frozen deposits. But with the help of this total surveillance system and the high-tech digital totalitarianism, China successfully thwarted the attempt to protest. And their money, well, stays frozen. And this is actually a reality of China's economic problem. It will never be solved using economic measures, only political ones. According to Sixtone, at least 12 of the depositors they spoke with said their health app turned red once they arrived in the city. And that means they scanned specific QR codes at railway stations, hotels, and other venues that required them. Well, of course, we know that China uses these QR codes to track residents' locations with national and local level apps as part of its COVID protocol. But Reuters also reported at least $178 million worth of deposits has been frozen since April. So this isn't something that just randomly happened to these people. And the 3 small banks all froze their deposits on the same day, precisely on April 18th, with all 3 telling customers that they're just upgrading their internal systems. Well, the 2 months upgrade seems to have gone on forever, and now they need to get the police involved to stop protesters demanding their money. Now, I don't know much about tech, but what I do know is a system upgrade usually doesn't take that long, and if it does, well, there better be some explanations. The banks have issued nothing, not any communication on the matter since. Normally, a local event shouldn't actually be the cause of speculation, but under the context we just provided, which is that China's economy is bad, well, it seems rather appropriate to speculate what is happening on a local level and how that can be extrapolated to the national level. So let's first talk about the people who essentially got robbed, right? The Chinese authorities will use the health app, this public health system, to limit the movement of protesters by turning their helpful squares red. And this health app has become integral to controlling citizens' movements in China. A red code means you're essentially barred from all establishments, like banks. And if you have something like a yellow, well, potentially you're barred from restaurants or you're limited to certain places. Of course, green is good to go. Now, the authorities are using the public health system, supposedly, to stop those who want their money from the bank. And since when do economic stability and public health cross paths? Again, this is just a micro-scale example. Let's talk about something much bigger. According to ShanghaiStock.com, the Chinese government is loaning a massive amount of money to promote steady investment infrastructure. The amount adds to hundreds of billions of yuan, which would still be billions of US dollar in currency exchange. And these so-called stabilizing investments are happening in cities across different provinces. Now, I see a two-pronged strategy here. What we know is that the zero-COVID model, of course, won't go away in China, and therefore, these projects serve to boost individual cities' ability to produce and operate, while other major cities cannot under lockdown. For example, if Shanghai is to go back into lockdown again, then say Wuhan or Beijing or another city can take over the production needs. And the second is that there's a desperate attempt to revive their economy by the means of, for example, ShanghaiStock.com talks about it's in its own account, which is that due to weak consumption and weak external demand in China, part of that is the supply chain issue. As China fails to meet demands for export due to the factories and facilities shutting down over the virus, we can begin to see that the effects are both external and internal. While the US is, of course, rightly concerned about protecting its own supply chain or even developing one to make it less dependent on China, at the U.S. Economic and Security Review Commission, the government's leading advisory panel on China policy, people argue that China is facing an issue of supply chain of its own. Again, because largely of the COVID measures, and this is all political, by the way, nothing economic yet. The key is that China is seeking to achieve self-reliance in many sectors, but has failed to build its own domestic industries in critical areas like semiconductors, electric vehicle, batteries, and the financial sector. Plus, we know that the financial sector in particular, which I'll talk about later, has been under heavy scrutiny by the Chinese government, and that means the Xi Jinping model of achieving internal circulation, where China doesn't have to rely on anybody else, is still far from possible. Hence why they're calling for steady or stabilizing developments across China, which means low risk, sort of high rewards. And in the midst of the Ukrainian war, today we learned that it seems the Chinese president will continue to support Putin. We saw how the view of China changed over how they behave towards Russia and being so friendly towards Putin. And this has also been an opportunity to show that the West can unify in sanctioning the bad actor. And if China wants to prepare for a Taiwan invasion and knows that it will get sanctioned, its failing economy cannot currently sustain such an effort to invade, and therefore they will try to put at least the entire economic system isolated from or barriered from the international system.